Anytime foreigners consider traveling to a new country, naturally some misconceptions are going to pop up. People will say, don't do this, don't do that, stay away from this area, or everyone's favorite, it's dangerous. As someone who heard several of these things about Mexico City but then actually spent 35 days there, I'd like to bust some myths or misconceptions about one of the best cities that I've ever traveled to. Hey everyone, I'm Ethan. I found a list of 10 common myths on this article. I'll link it below. Anyway, they kind of talk about their experiences with these myths, but I thought I would talk about mine because naturally myth lists, it's not black and white, it's going to be nuanced. So I want to share some of that nuanced experience with you as someone who has spent some considerable time in Mexico City. Obviously, I'm not an expert on the topic. Let's hop into myth number 1. Myth number 1, Mexico City is dangerous. So I'm sure everyone is tired about this, especially if you live in Mexico. Let's just get out of the way. Mexico City is not dangerous. It's not any more dangerous than any other large city that you're going to be visiting to. I didn't have any issues at all with safety. I kept track of my belongings and all that good stuff. There shouldn't be any extra issues. I'm not gonna harp on the safety of the city. I personally had zero issues. I felt completely safe the entire time I was there. So let's move on to number 2. You can't eat the food in Mexico City without getting sick. So obviously this is not true. For the first week or so, all I did was eat street food. And then I actually went to a restaurant, and then after I went to that restaurant, I ended up getting sick, just out of the blue. It can happen anywhere around the world. Mexico City is not the issue itself. I personally had very minimal issues with getting sick. Like I said, I had like a 24-hour bug from eating something, but I was there for 5 weeks. It's bound to happen wherever you travel. You're kind of gonna go through some of that gastrointestinal issues when you kind of change to a completely new diet. Yes, it can happen. Take precautions if you know that you have a more upset stomach than other people, but you're not gonna get sick right away. Myth number 3, Mexico City is all about margaritas. I don't even know where this article came up with this myth. I've literally never heard of that. Margaritas are probably the most popular Mexican drink in the US. But yeah, there's plenty of other Mexican drinks that you can get in Mexico City. There are mezcals, which are probably my favorites. It's like a smoky tequila. And then micheladas are like a really nice beer drink. They're kind of made a bunch of different ways. But yeah, Mexico City is definitely not all margaritas. That's kind of a stupid myth. I don't even know where they came up with it, to be honest. Myth number 4, Mexican food is all burritos and nachos. So I would like to kind of reverse this myth. The more myth that I think is more prevalent is Mexican food is all tacos, which I've talked about on some other videos, and it is so much more than tacos. Frankly, tacos are kind of just a quick bite, something you get to eat. They're not in any means the be-all, end-all of Mexican cuisine. There are so much more variety. But after you get your tacos in the first, day or two that you're there, start branching out to other things. I'm telling you, there's such a big variety, and there are really, really delicious bites. Talked about this in some of my can't miss foods video. A couple of my favorites are poblado con queso tacos, the pambazo sandwich. I love the sweet tamales. Really, you just got to go out and explore. I'm telling you, there's so much food out there. Myth number 5, the US State Department warns against visiting Mexico City. I don't even know what this is. I guess the US State Department has a website where they issue travel advisories. Most major cities are the same level, and Mexico City is the same level, so let's just move on. I'm not even gonna touch on this, to be honest. Myth number 6, Mexico is always hot and sunny. So this is something that I was actually curious about before I visited, because most people that visit Mexico tend to go to the coastal, beach towns where on average it is very, very hot and sunny. But in Mexico City, that's not quite the case. Mexico City sits up on 7,200 feet of elevation, and due to that, the climate is pretty temperate, meaning it doesn't fluctuate temperatures wildly. When I was there, it was in the mid-40s with a high in the mid-70s every day, and then even during the summer months, it's only kind of in the 50s to the low 80s, 80 or 81. So it's really not hot and sunny all year round. Myth number 7, everything in Mexico City is cheap. So This one is really relative. Obviously, you can still find things that are very high priced. You can find things that are medium priced and low priced. But yeah, I mean, depending on where you're coming from, it's going to be either cheaper or more expensive. It really depends. I mean, for example, like I spent $180 on a cooking class in the US, that would still be considered a lot of money. But on the other end, I mean, on average, like for daily things like food and, you know, toiletries or things you're just picking up on a day-to-day basis, like all that stuff is going to be cheaper, you know, compared to US prices. Myth number 8, you need to speak Spanish. So obviously you don't have to speak Spanish to get around. You know, you can go to any country these days and not speak any of the, you know, the language and, you know, use like Google Translate or some other translating app and you can get around. Like, we all can do that. I will say though, it really does help if you speak Spanish, and it kind of just makes the experience a little bit more enjoyable. You know, I'm not fluent myself, but I do have kind of a good base of vocabulary. I can make myself understood most of the time. I still can't listen worth a damn. It's so hard. They talk so fast and I'm just like, ugh. But I would say being able to know some basic Spanish is definitely a benefit. You know, that being said, no, you don't have to speak Spanish. But if you are visiting, I would say definitely brush up on your numbers, brush up on some general like ordering out vocabulary like for food and things like that. Just general vocabulary like that is definitely helpful to have. But yeah, you don't have to be able to speak Spanish. Myth number 9, public transport is unsafe. So obviously, like, it's just like the first one, talking about safety. I had zero issues on public transport. I was traveling with my camera and my camera bag most times on the metro into various places around the city, and I had zero issues. It does get very crowded on peak times in the morning and later in the afternoon and evening when people are coming back from work. So I would maybe avoid it during those peak times if you do have like a lot of bags that you need to keep track of. But outside of that, like, it's not any more or less safe than like if you were taking the metro in New York City, say. Myth number 10, Mexico City is a sprawling metropolis with no soul. So I don't even know where they came up with this myth. Like, obviously, Mexico City has a ton of cool little neighborhoods to explore. You can go to Roma, Roma Norte, Polanco, Condesa, Coyoacan, Cuauhtémoc. Like, there are so many cool little areas that all have their own little uniqueness to them. Some are kind of older and colonial style. Some are a little bit newer and built up. And it's really fun to go around and just explore all of these different places in Mexico City. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of insight into what it's like to travel and kind of, you know, live in Mexico City, you know, from someone who's been there for, you know, 35 days. Not a ton of time. I'm not an expert on the city, but I did have a very good experience. Would highly recommend traveling to Mexico City. If you do have any more questions, feel free to drop them below. But all in all, I think it's really good to share kind of firsthand experiences as foreigners when we do visit a new country, to kind of help, you know, cut down some of the stigmas and misconceptions that we commonly hear about these places. You know, most of the time it's an anecdotal thing that someone's like, oh, they got sick, you know, when they went to Mexico. So like, oh, you always get sick when you eat food. Obviously, that's not the case. There's much more nuance to these things than that. So hopefully I could share that with you. But that is going to wrap it up for this video. I will catch you in the next one. Peace.